Something I want to show you that's very important if you are mixing choir vocals, like everybody's doing nowadays, right? Ashake.
Is it the way you shake it, oh? The bottom of my heart is racing, oh.
Yeah. So you can hear that there's a lot of reverb, but the reverb is not competing with the vocals, and the reverb seems to come after the vocal. So there's a few ways you can achieve this. Let me show you. One of the first way to do this is to ensure that you have a long enough pre-delay time, since, this is going to be like a huge reverb. That's why my pre-delay is set to 87 milliseconds. Also, that's after you've done your calculation to get the correct reverb time and then pre-delay time, right? But you want a long pre-delay time. First things first. But after that, there's a trick I'm using to make sure that the reverb is not overpowering the vocal, and that's just sidechaining. So I've sidechained the vocal itself to the reverb. So that way, when the vocal is playing, the reverb is going to be ducked down a little bit. So the reverb will just be like underneath the vocal instead of on top of the vocals. And in this case, my bus 8 is also summing bus for the choir vocals. I'm going to come to that in a bit and explain to you what that's also doing, right? Yeah, so I'm sidechaining the vocal bus, that's the choir bus, to the reverb. So let's listen to what that looks like. Right, and for the setting, what I'm doing here is I've set the ratio to 7:1. So for every 7 dB above my threshold, it drops by 1 dB. And I've set the threshold to minus 32.5 dB. Also fairly slow attack, around 20 milliseconds. And then I've set a slow release because I want the compressor to hold on to the compression while the vocal is playing. If you look at the compressor, you see that the needle is still hanging. That means the compressor is still compressing. Right, so the compressor is just holding that compression, right? Making sure that the reverb is constantly ducked behind the vocal as long as the vocal is playing. So that's what's happening here. I'm not doing any makeup gain because the point is not to add anything. It's just to control the reverb. Another thing that I'm doing here as well is on the summing bus, I'm using the Pro MB multiband compressor to also do some multiband compression around 3000. At this point, around 2800 hertz. Now, that is because my lead vocals is also on that frequency range, right? So by doing this, I'm ensuring that the choir doesn't overpower the lead vocal. So let's listen to that.
Is it the way you shake it, oh? The bottom of my heart is racing, oh. Show. Break it, oh. Make it carry my correct service, oh. Yeah. Girl, I'm at your service, oh. Anything you want, girl, you can have it, oh. If you like, you can have it, oh.
So doing that creates a very, very perfect blend between the lead vocals and all of the choir and the backups, and everything just sounds great. Now for the setting, what I'm doing is very fast attack and very slow release, so that when the compression kick in on that frequency range, it holds that compression. It keeps the choir and the backup below the lead on that frequency range. So they're not competing, they're not struggling to share the same frequency range, right? Even though they are there, one is louder than the other. So they can exist perfectly together as husband and wife. No fighting. All right, the ratio is what? 4:1. I'm doing a softening here so that the transition from compressed to compressed is not like abrupt, it's like smooth. And then the range is set to minus 5 dB. So if you do this, or if you try this, you are sure to get a very smooth and clean mix when you're mixing choirs, right? Or when you're mixing like a crowd type vocals like everybody's doing nowadays.